Hi everyone, Jay here from Jay Productions, back with another video for Beginner's Guide to Age of Sigmar. Today we're talking about Orruk Warclans. So, talking about Orruk Warclans, what you need to know getting into them and getting into them with Age of Sigmar. So first is that Orruk Warclans is two former books, and a third army, which has now been discontinued technically, but you can still use those models. But primarily two previous books, the Orruk Ironjawz and the Orruk Bonesplitterz, have been put into one book together. Now, this one book gives you 3 ways to play, and both are very aggressive, and they're very fighty armies with an emphasis on hitting fast, hitting hard. Now, the two armies are very much, they do that, but they both do that in different ways, and they're interesting in that regard. So, the first thing you need to know about these Orruks is that your allegiance for your book is split into the Ironjawz, and then you split into the Bonesplitterz. So the Ironjawz are a heavily armored, more elite version of the Orcs. They've got higher saves, higher to hit, they hit better. They've got just as good to wound. They can be pumped up to do a lot more damage with certain buff units, particularly Orruk Warclans, which are probably the best thing. And they hit like a ton of bricks. They have your big monster, which is the Maw Crusher. And they have a named hero version on that. And they've also got things like Brutes, which are big, almost monstrous infantry, but not quite. And the Gore Grunters, which are very hard-hitting cavalry. But for Orcs, they're somewhat low on numbers, unless you're fielding lots and lots of Ardboys, as they're called, which are your main sort of unit. They're really good horde unit. You can field them in units of 5, but you have to field them in units of 10 before they become battle line. So be aware of that when you go in and you're deciding what you're going to purchase. You can buy units of 5 of those, and they'll count as other units. Other than that, all of the Ironjawz units, except for their heroes, are battle line. So the Gore Grunters, the Brutes, and units of 10 or more Ardboys are all battle line. So you can get any number of those, and boom, you've got your mandatory battle line. One of each is your mandatory battle line, and you can just keep filling those up. So it makes it really easy to decide what to include in your army, because you can include you can buy one of each and just keep buying more models to add on to it and make it one really big squad. Now, as always, there's certain things that doesn't really mesh well. Certain things, for example, like Gore Grunters, their bases are way too big to really want to do that. Same with the Brutes, their bases really too big. They do have 2-inch reach weapons, which is pretty good. So those are good weapons. And then you've got the Ardboys. They've got 1-inch reach weapons, but they're very good, and you can spread them out, and you want to field them in large numbers. They're one you can keep stacking on top of. So it tends to be an army that you're going to go multiple small units with, and that is kind of their strength. You can use some of the smaller things to cap objectives. The Gore Grunters can flank, you can move up your guys, and you can control the battlefield with your aggressiveness. And overall, for the Ironjawz, they excel compared to the Bonesplitterz section of the book. They excel at killing elite infantry, and they excel at killing, well, anything with a high armor save, typically. Which mostly is elite infantry, monstrous infantry. They can cut down cavalry in short order, and they can work their way through a horde. And they do this by virtue of hitting well, wounding well, having rend on just about everything, and the ability to have 1 to 2 damage or 2 to 3 damage on just about anything. And that's before we even get into how fast they are. See, both the Orcs, no matter which version you play, are fast. It's just a matter of how they do it. Changes depending on which section of the army you want to go for. The Ironjawz, they have a bunch of allegiance abilities that make them faster, essentially, because you have a really low movement across anything that's not your cavalry or your big Wyvern Maw Crusher, and as a result, you end up with an army that seems slow, but then you look at some of your allegiance abilities. You get shot from more than 9 inches away, get a free d6 move. boom. You get command points, which you can use to have a unit move. Boom. You have stackable +1 to charge. You have +1 from your legions, just flat, and then you take drummers on your Ardboy units, and they get +3. And other ways to get pluses to charge, whether that be from clans, all of a sudden you've got really reliable charges. So you can move up and get those charges and cover a lot of more ground than what your opponent might suspect. And despite not having a lot of mobility options, you do have some mobility options, which really, the ones you have are all the ones you need most of the time. So you're fast enough to play the objective of the game, but more importantly, with this kind of aggressive army, you're fast enough to get into combat turn 1 potentially. This is an army with turn 1 potential combat. And it's achievable through some interesting facts. And then you've got the Ironjawz to go along with that. They're a far more elite army with far less models. Is that their killing potential is that you're rewarded for killing enemy units completely by immediately before your opponent gets to pick something, because in Age of Sigmar it's you go, then your opponent goes. In this case, with the Ironjawz, you go, you kill something, then your opponent doesn't get to pick, you actually get to pick another Ironjawz unit to go. And that can actually potentially keep steamrolling, but they have to have not fought yet in the combat phase. But they don't have to wait till later. So you can use that to really steamroll and chew your way through potentially, so long as you can get those killing blows. So you might be smaller units with potentially less attacks than, say, the Bonesplitterz part of the Orruk Warclans, but you can potentially hit a lot harder and kill a lot more efficiently. Then you've also got the waaagh ability that they have to give yourself more attacks, which just allows you to chop through stuff even better, but it's once per game. It's basically the, I'm going to end this now. I'm either going to win, or I'm going to devastate you to such a point that you can't come back. So the orcs, yeah, they're basically go in, smash well, particularly with the Ironjawz. But they are very command points heavy, the Ironjawz, as opposed to the Bonesplitterz section, which don't really, they can use command points, they've got some good uses of them, but they're not super reliant on it to use their Mighty Destroyer's Legion's ability, which is probably the most important thing for this army, because, as I said, it lets them move, but it also potentially lets them charge instead, or even fight, all in the hero phase. So, small units, potentially, with some large bricks of Ardboys, all fighting really quickly, all over the place, with high efficiency, trying to chew through armies that outnumber them, while trying to use your armor saves to tank. So there's the Ironjawz in a nutshell. You've got, in both sections, you've got clans to build in. Now, fortunately, clans for the Ironjawz, as we're looking at right now, they're not super bad. Each one's interesting. However, unlike other books, there's no clear, you must go with this one, it is the best. They're all certainly balanced. They've all got an interesting feature. And their things are no less better than the generic command traits. This is an army that, unlike certain armies where you want to go into the specific clan, you want to go into that sub-faction for it's got a really good ability, here you can make do without it, so you're not really penned into building in a certain way. So the Ironjawz are really freeform as a result. You can just kind of slap together an army pretty quickly with the low number of models you need to buy, because you do have pretty decent points, monetary cost, but your points cost is just a tad enough that you're slightly verging on a horde, depending on how you want to build. You can throw down some big blocks of guys, but your entire army is probably going to be mostly those blocks of guys and maybe 3-4 other units and some heroes. But you're not losing out on anything by taking a clan, and you're not losing anything by not taking a clan. Interestingly, you've also, unlike the Bonesplitterz, you also have mount traits for that big Maw Crusher, which is a really good model. It's really powerful. The Spear, the Gore Hacker, as it's called, is the superior weapon with the 8 attacks and 2-inch reach. You want that reach and those extra attacks. The other one is okay, but you could go both, but the Gore Hacker is definitely the better one. It's a very powerful thing. It's also it's very good for what it does. Multiples of them are not something anyone particularly wants to deal with. But if you take multiples of them, you are going to probably want battle line that can keep up with them, and the only battle line that can really keep up with them is the Gore Grunters. If you're just taking one, then you can use it as a wrecking ball. And if you put a lot of eggs into baskets, you can certainly make it a very powerful wrecking ball. And as a result, the Maw Crusher will either kill anything that you need it to kill, or it'll die miserably because your opponent will focus everything on it. Hopefully by which time you've gotten the rest of your army in to just beat the crap out of them. It's got some mount traits. All of those mount traits are really good. The Weird-Un is probably the worst one. Even then, that's still nice because that's potentially ignoring mortal wounds from spells and endless spells. 50-50 chance. That's still good. And that's the worst one. Let that sink in. That's the worst one, and that's still amazing. There are some units, there are some armies that kill for that kind of ability. You've got War Chanter beats, which are really good, but the War Chanters themselves are just a staple for the Ironjawz. Unfortunately, they come in the Get Starting box. The Get Starting box for this army is a really good deal, as it lets you just assemble the War Chanters, which is a good buff that you always want at least 2 of those in your army. 3 if you want to get really cheesy and focus more on fielding larger squads and just smashing your way through things. And then you only have to pick up a few bits and pieces afterwards, like the Weird Knob, a Mega Boss. And now, your Mega Boss comes on 2 varieties. As I said before, you got your Maw Crusher, and then you got your Guy on Foot. The Guy on Foot is not as much of a wrecking ball, but he's better at supporting the rest of your army by, basically, you put the right stuff on him, and he dishes out the free movements and the free attacks, and then he buffs everyone, and he sends things, and he works better in combination with the slower things in your army, like Brutes and Ardboys. He makes an excellent companion for them, whereas the Maw Crusher makes an excellent companion for Ardboys going up the board real fast, being teleported up there, and Gore Grunters, which can keep the pace and do the cavalry charge. So, there's ways to make both work. But the temptation of the Wrecking Ball of the Maw Crusher is just good. You do have a named character, and that is Gordrak. Gordrak is he's a Maw Crusher plus. He's a Maw Crusher, but better. And so rules as written, nothing says he can't take one of those mount traits. Just bear that in mind. Check with your opponent. But it does mean if you make him your general to do wars and things, he ain't going to be able to take any particular traits or relics, which you're losing out on some cool buffs, on him at least. You can put them elsewhere in your army, and I highly recommend you do. He's a Maw Crusher plus. He's really good, but he's even better in the Great Waaagh, which is the 3rd army in this book. In terms of spell lore, the Ironjawz have a really good spells, particularly, well, I say really good, there's 2 particularly good spells, and the rest are average mortal wounds output. You know, they're not particularly great, considering how expensive things are and your bonuses to cast and what you're wanting to be casting. The 2 best ones, Hand of Gork, pick up the unit, teleport it, and bash 'em lads, everything wholly within 16 inches of your Weird Knob, now wounds on 2s. That's crazy. So, you can get some crazy stuff going on. Again, your clans are all right. Particularly, the Choppers is probably the worst one. But, even then, it's okay. The main thing is the War Chanters really benefit from that one, being able to spread out their buff, so it's pretty good. And, you know, makes it sure that you've got multiple damage across the board reliably, so you don't need to bring as many of those, but it's, once again, eating into your command points, which you would otherwise use to move. The other ones are pretty good. Bloodtooths are very fast if you want to go fast, and Iron Suns are just, they do what Ironjawz already do. They just do it with slightly more protection. In a little, they do it the same way, essentially. It's probably the most general one, and probably the worst, second worst one after the choppers. It just does what you already do. So, that's pretty good. And in overall, thanks to the simplification of the book, they're really easy to put together. You don't really need to worry about it. You look at the War Scroll with the Ardboys, you put on as many shields as you're allowed to put on, because those are just extra protection. With the different weapon loadouts, the Gore Grunters are better with the Gore Hackers, with the 2-inch reach and the extra damage on the charge. Otherwise, you don't actually have to worry about the weapons particularly until you get to the Brutes. Brutes are one where you want to actually pick one weapon or the other, and you don't want to buy those special weapons that they have. The Riptooth Fist and the Crusher, that mace and the fist, don't buy it. Don't model that on. That's terrible. I've never seen it work well. It's probably the worst weapon they've got, right after the Jagged Gore Hacker, which you're just like, don't bother with that. Sorry, not the Jagged Gore Hacker. The other weapon. Their special weapon, which, whose name I've forgotten right now. I can't seem to see it. Here it is. It's the Gore Chopper. Don't take the Gore Chopper. Just stick to taking the Gore Hacker or the pair of Brute Choppers. The main difference between those two weapons is the pair of Brute Choppers have 1 extra attack, but lose 1, inch of range, but the Jagged Gore Hacker, the Spearish one, has 2-inch reach and 3 attacks. So, given the size of their bases, their big models, it's worth giving them the Jagged Gore Hackers. That's all I'm going to say on that. But the pair of Brute Choppers does make them, you know, you can have them chop through things a little bit faster, slightly better horde damage if you can get a good charge and spread them out and get all those attacks in. But the Jagged Gore Hacker will probably serve you more reliably. Just don't bother with the Gore Chopper, and don't bother with the Boss Claw and Brute Smasher. They're bad. They're bad. Then you've got, and that's really it. That's all you need to know. They're a nice and easy, simple army to put together as a result. The Bonesplitterz are the second side of the book. And now, the Bonesplitterz section is more focused on sheer number of attacks, and they are really good at killing infantry, but a lot of their abilities are also geared towards killing monsters, something that, funnily enough, the Ironjawz technically do a little bit better, but you have different ways of dealing with monsters that gives you more flexibility. And while monsters, you know, there are some really powerful monster factions, it means on the rare occasions you come up to them, your army, which normally, if you look at their rules and equipment, wouldn't be fantastic, it means you're certainly going to get an edge when fighting those rare armies. Things like dealing solely with Beastclaw Raiders. And countering them is really hard, so you're going to stand a better chance because a lot of the Bonesplitterz stuff pretty much interacts with monsters. So the Bonesplitterz themselves, they're far more hoardy. They're what you think about when you think, oh yeah, I'm just going to build an army of orcs. Lots of models. Nice big units of 20 guys, 30 guys, 2 wounds apiece. They're naked, so they're literally relying on their magical tattoos. In terms of speed, they do their speed in a slightly different way. They don't have the number of movement gimmicks that the Ironjawz have, but instead they've got some different ones that, while they can't really spam, get them where they need to be just as reliably. So you've got tireless trackers, for example, which lets half your Bonesplitterz army move 5 inches. that's good for capping first objective, or just getting that a little bit further up. And then, you know, things that you don't need to move, you can then teleport across the field. And you can cast magic spells on the guys that you do move to the front to double their move when it comes time for your regular move. Of course, being orcs, you don't really need to use that often to back away from stuff, to bait guys into charging you with other high aggression armies. You could, though, and that's the good thing about it, because it's a move before the game begins, so it's decent in a lot of ways, giving you a lot of nuance. Again, you've always got a reliable, you've always got a 6-up save no matter what on everything you have, thanks to your war paint. You deal with monsters really well. If you kill monsters, you don't have to worry about battle shock, and you have your own version of the waaagh. So the thing about this army is that it's very reliant on several kinds of units, which fortunately, and this is the funny thing, where you have to go to the Ironjawz and you pick up each of your units individually, but you have to pick up less of them. This is an army where when you go to buy the models, you'll be buying a lot of the same box over and over and over and over again. You'll be buying a lot of the same box over and over again, and then you'll have to be hunting down the hero characters, your leaders, which are older models, and thus they can be a little annoying to get, build, and paint, but they're good heroes for your army. You need them, you want them. But overall, it's a case of you're just building it again and again and again. So your one box of Savage Orruks makes Savage Orruk boys, which are slightly more defensive ones, which you want to give them spears, and, you know, they get a +1 to their save, and ironically, while the army doesn't look like it has high saves, it can be buffed up to have high saves in combat, which is where it matters. So you can actually get them up to a 3-up save, potentially, with the right combination of stuff. So your things, just like the Ironjawz, look slow. The Bonesplitterz look squishy, but they ain't. So that's a bit of deceptive, bit of cheeky cunning there with the Orruks. Mork is smiling on you if you use it right. So you've got that, and they're the ones you want to feel in great big blobs, and give them the spears, because spears are always better when you have more in a unit. And then the same box also builds instead the Orruk Arrow Boys, which are technically, I think, the only shooting in this entire book, other than the Maw Crusher's roar. Yeah, it is. So not counting magic. So they're terrible shooting. They're about as good as skinks, but they have way more shots. So you can just... So the Arrow Boys can just sit at the back and support the boys, cap objectives, and still contribute to the fight. And even when they get into melee, they're still orcs. So, you know, they still hit pretty decently. And then the same box instead can be used to build the Maw Boys, which are essentially orc berserkers. You can field just as many of them. They don't get the extra saves. They pass up the extra durability in combat for far more attacks, and these are the main hitting force of your army, because where in Ironjawz it's quality over quantity, here it's the reverse. Here it's quantity over quality. You just want to get as many attacks in as possible. You want to have the buff so that each hit roll of 6 explodes into 2 attacks, and then just bury them in wounds and bury them in saves so that they have to make so many saves that they just fail. And just, that is your whole synergies, and they all go towards making that happen with the Bonesplitterz army. You've also got, out of that same box, you can build Big Stabbers. Now, Big Stabbers are your anti-monster, anti-heavy infantry, heavy monstrous infantry sort of unit. And they're a lovely little suicide unit. So long as you can get them close enough, you can still potentially do some damage. they are, in the Bonesplitterz section, one of only 2 units to have any rend, which is quite hilarious, since they have an ability which would be so much better if they had rend all over the board. But they are your biggest hitters. They're your thing that don't rely on quantity, but even then, you still want quantity. They also have... The Big Sabbers are probably the worst thing, and are kind of a supporters unit. The problem they have is that they're not battle line. But, you know, they are also built out of that box. So, 3 out of 4... Well, of those 4 things that you build from that one box, you probably want each... You probably want 3 of those. A unit of one of each of those types. And then it's the same deal when you go to the Boar Boys. You have the Boar Boys, same deal, slightly more defensive. Or you can build them as Boar Boy Maniacs, which slightly more offensive. They're basically faster Maw Boys. Charge them in, do lots of damage, load on the attacks, field them in higher numbers, kind of abuse their cavalry bases with your positioning, and just try and generally mulch through things and just pile on attacks. Try and surround things and overwhelm them. And that's pretty much the way their whole army goes. Just like the orcs, they're like the Ironjawz, they're very freeform in that you have your clans, but the clans aren't overly restrictive for them, and you don't lose anything out by not going for a clan. You can stick with the generic stuff and be just as good. You have interesting uses for command points as well. You have only a few really essential command abilities, which are pretty good. But the thing that you have over the Ironjawz is that while you're a far more quantity over quality, you're also, when you pick the Bonesplitterz, going for a lot more magic. Yeah, so the thing about the Bonesplitterz is that you have your main guy, the Wargog Prophet, and then you have your War Docs, and they're all wizards, and then you have essentially a wizard on a pig, and then you have the big boss, and the big boss is a nice beat stick, and him and the guy and the wizard on the pig, whose name escapes me, and they both have command abilities that let them pile on extra attacks and support their specific units. So there's that. And then the other ones are very much wizards. It's the Maniac Weird Knob is the nutter on the piggy. He's your wizard on a pig, and he also supports them, and so they both synergize with their respective units. So Weird Knob Maniac with the Boar Boys and Boar Riders, and Big Boss with your boys. And then your Wargog and your War Docs really do the heavy lifting in terms of making your synergies go off, and you have really good magic as a result. And you field more wizards than you would in the Ironjawz as a result, unless you really want to lean into the Weird Knob. You've got really good spells like Brutal Beast Spirits, which gives you +1 hit, run, and charge, and if you roll a double, you get to choose 2 units to benefit from it. The Breath of Gorka Morka, which lets guys double their movement and fly, and if you roll a double on your cast, they get triple movement and fly. And then you've got awesome stuff, which Cunning Beast Spirits gives +1 to save, which goes into that synergy I was talking about buffing up your guys on the front line to make them surprisingly tanky. So your wizards are really good. And even then, your clans are not good, but you can easily build into them if you really want to. You don't have to build into them specifically. You can just basically go, I've put together this army, I'm just going to take this one today, and no harm, no foul. Like, they're really easy to just slot into. Like the Bone Grins, they're nice and aggressive, and they kind of taunt your opponent and aggro them when you get close enough, making sure that you can, that things are in combat. The Icebone they're one of the ones that are slightly more focused on boars with their command ability, but their general trait and their general artifacts are just nice in general. The Freezing Strike actually gives you rend on wound rolls of 6, so considering you really don't have any rend, that's it. And then you have Drakfoot. Drakfoot is shit. It's really bad. It's really, really bad. But it has its uses if you're going up against things like Death Armies with lots of Feel No Pains, or even Daughters of Cain. So, you know, and that's really it. They're a nice, simple army to get. You just buy lots of those 1 or 2 boxes, you put together some nice big hordes, and then you get a Wargog, 2 War Docs, get yourself a Maniac if you're gonna run Cavalry, and 1 or 2 big bosses. And that's all your heroes. And then just fill up the rest with as many boys as you can get. Regular boys for just soaking damage. Arrow boys for holding objectives. And then boars and more boys for just straight up damage dealing. Simple. And then you come to the big waaagh allegiance ability. Now, as I mentioned before, it is a case where the third way to play supports an army that was discontinued. So, what I mean by that is, in the book, due to the way the keywords work, you can bring in old Orruk models. You can bring in things that have been discontinued, like the old Orruk boys, Orruk boss on Waven, that kind of thing. So, some of the old fantasy models. So, if you're a returning player, and you're coming into Age of Sigmar with a host of old fantasy orc army, you can throw most of those units into the big waaagh. And then you're able to mix with the new units and the Bonesplitterz, and all 3 come together in a nice juicy soup. And now, the soup is really good. I'm not really a fan of soup in 40k. I think that soup is way too salty, and probably got rat poison in it. But the soup here is the good kind of soup. Now, the big waaagh gives you the best of both worlds, and it basically has this lovely little chart where you get rewarded for doing things you were already doing and bringing things you were already bringing, and you can potentially get really powerful buffs. You start off, the first couple of buffs are basically half of the buffs from each of the previous sections of the book. So you get, for example, the first couple of things you get are the add 1s to charges from the Ironjawz, except now you've got that on Bonesplitterz as well. So your Bonesplitterz, who are already fast on the charge, can get even faster as well. And then you've got the moving forward when you get shot. You've got ways to drain your waaagh to get your casting better, so you can abuse those lovely little spells like the teleportation or the doubling movement. And then as you get further and further up this chart, around the 20-point mark, your army just becomes incredible. You have the potential to make if you take a whole Ironjawz army and you just make it the big waaagh instead, by the time you get to 20 points, you can potentially have your whole army hitting on 2s, wounding on 2s. Yeah! With 1 rend, buff them with a War Chanter, now they're 2 damage apiece, give them a waaagh, now they're 3 to 4 attacks apiece. Yeah. It's some powerful combos. Now, the way the points table works is you do have to work for it, and you do get rewarded for it, but you can be just under the points that you need to get certain abilities. Do the thing, because they all take effect, at certain points. But when you generate points, allows you to try and push yourself up there so that you have the buffs when you need them. When you do have the potential to lose some of these points, for example, you can sacrifice some of them to get pluses to your casting for your magic, which, as we talked about, is really good. Even with the Ironjawz, you probably don't want to use it with them as much because they're already good spells, and you got the Weird Knob's got ways of getting bonuses to his cast. But for mixing in Bonesplitterz, some good stuff. Now, you've also got, other ways of using it. With the waaagh, there's a potential you might lose all your waaagh points. So the big waaagh, which is the final thing you get at the end of your table after you've got the max number of points, is basically it's a super waaagh that affects the whole table. But you have the potential to lose everything and be reset to 0. So it's a big gamble. Which, if you're orcs, they're all about the gamble. And of course, there's lots of ways. The whole rest of the allegiance ability is all about generating lots and lots of points, such as using a command point to get point for every 10 Orruk models within 12 of a hero or 18 of your general. You get points for having war chanters, points for having war docs, points for charging, points for having character charging, points for having units 10 more models charging. And then, while your general's alive, you just get d6 points. And now, I talked about Gordrakk earlier. Gordrakk is a fantastic character in the Ironjawz alone. He's even better in the big waaagh, because if he is your general, you get a flat 6 instead of d6 while he's alive. Which means, with the right army build, mostly looking at lots of Ardboys, you can have your army get up to the 20 points for the hitting and wounding on 2s really quickly. That's where his beauty comes in, and I personally believe that he's much better here than in the other one, especially if you're looking to build it. So if you look to build Gordrakk, you basically are setting yourself up for be able to take advantage of both of these really well, because once again, you can just take everything in the Ironjawz, say you're running it as a Great Waaagh, have Gordrakk be your general, and now you can get even better buffs than what you had before. You just lose out on a few movement shenanigans, which there are ways you can accommodate for, just playing a little bit more defensively, make sure your opponent comes to you, play the objective so that they have to push you off them. So there's that. Maybe even mix in a few arrow boys to harry the guys, to force them into having to charge you or sit there and take a damage. And it's Age of Sigmar, they will want to charge you eventually if you're in the right position. You can force them to have to fight you if your positioning is correct. And even then, if you force them out of positioning with your positioning, mission accomplished. Because hopefully mission accomplished, because you've done that for a reason that's going to win you the game. And once again, really, really easy to build into, because the Great Waaagh is just grab whatever orcs you've got, and you can, divvy into it. So you can start with the Warclans, you can get the book, build into the Ironjawz for a nice small army. That's not going to take a lot of effort, that's nice and elite. Small, hyphenated finger marks, depending on how many Ardboys you're running. Because you can run a lot of Ardboys. And then you can shift and start a Bonesplitterz army. And you can do that. And if you like painting the color green, have lots of them. And then, once you've got those 2 different collections, you'd be able to play 3 different armies depending on how you're feeling at any given day. Now, that's a lot of money, so yeah. But that is the beauty of this book and the great thing about Warclans. And now, additionally, in case you're wondering, now, even better about the Great Waaagh is that the command traits, artifacts of power, spell laws, mount traits, and war chanter beats from both the Ironjawz and Bonesplitterz are all available, as well as both sides of Battalions. The only thing you can't use are the battle traits, so their allegiance abilities. As listed in their sections, you have to use the allegiance ability of the Great Waaagh, because obviously you're taking the Great Waaagh as your allegiance. And you can't make use of the clans, but as I've already said, the clans are really just optional sort of, I can't be bothered deciding particularly which artifacts and command traits I'm going to be playing with today, so I'm just going to pick this one that's already there. So that's the really great thing about it. And now, in terms of battalions, you've got some interesting ones. Because your command point hungry is the Ironjawz, there's some good ones to build into that you can focus on getting those to collect, but you'll probably end up getting them all eventually if you want to go all in. But suffice to say, they're all nice and general in terms of their performance. You've got Ardfists, which are nice and easy to build with 3 units of Ardboys and a War Chanter. Well, you're going to get that just by buying 3 start collecting boxes, and you're going to have leftover units for the rest of your army. And it gives you some interesting, it gives you some potentially regenerating Ardboy units. So, cool. And you can really feel like a swarm. That one I actually just really like. It's just kind of themed. Like lots more orcs. Lets you get around the whole being somewhat low on numbers. Or if you're using low number Ardboys. Or it just lets you spam and really become a horde. But there's also another easy ones. You know, the Brutefist, 3 units of Brutes. Now, not all of these rules that they have are really good, but the fact that they're easy to build means that you get more command points, more relics for your hero, so you can experiment with more synergies and play around with a lot of the tools. And that's really the thing. It's an army that you can really play with everything. You know, things like the Iron Fist is really, really accommodating. The Gore Fist is really accommodating. A nice, synergistic combo if you go with the Maw Crusher route and want to spam Maw Crushers, because that's amazing. You want to, and you got Weird Fist. It's okay. It's really nice. Let's try and cast again, but it's also just really easy to build. These are all really easy to build. Now, they're a touch on the expensive side, but the cheapest ones, the Gore Fist, the Brute Fist, Ard Fist, again, they're just really easy to build. There's super battalions. No super battalion has ever been worth it in the history of Age of Sigmar, but, Now, there is an expansion from the White Dwarf. I don't own it. I've never looked at it. Not going to comment on it. But it deals with, if you like the Iron Suns clan, it gives the Iron Suns more stuff. But be aware that that is an option when you're getting into the Ironjawz. If you really like them in yellow, well, there are extra rules for the guys in yellow. Bonesplitterz battalions, they're nice and easy as well. To a certain extent, they certainly are slightly more expensive in terms of what they have. And sure, they're not particularly great except for 1 or 2 in terms of the abilities they offer for their points. But they're all using things that you're using anyway, because once again, the army's really easy to collect. There's not a lot of models in the range that you have to worry about, oh, okay, I need X unit, this unit, that unit, that unit, that unit, and they all have to synergize. Well, it's, nope, I have boys on pigs, big boys, and smart boys. That's it. But just an example, you've got something like the Brutal Ruck, very easy to build into straight off the gut. And all it requires is a Savage Big Boss and 2 to 5 units of Savage Orcs or Savage Orc Warboys. So, yeah. Straight in there. And that one, actually has a really good trait of letting you run and charge. And so that can be a nice foundation for an army. That's something very easy to include when you're first getting off and build into and be like, alright, I'm going to pick up these first couple of units. I'm just going to keep picking up the same boxes and building the same units. Grab a big boss. Grab this battalion. Now I'm ready to play at, a low points level. And then throw in some more stuff and build yourself up. And, as you keep building up, that actually escalates because of the points. So, yeah. And then you've got some other ones that are not so easy, but they're all pretty nice. So the Cop Ruck, 2 to 5 War Docs. You probably want 2 War Docs. I recommend 2 War Docs minimum, as they're great little support casters with nice little dancing, doing their little jive and dancing, getting jiggy with it on the battlefield. And I love War Docs. I love the whole theme that the Bonesplitterz are literally, their wizards are actually dancing, doing break dancing, and going all disco just in the background while everyone fights and dies, and them doing disco results in magic. Anyway, sorry, I really like Bonesplitterz. And then you get 2 to 5 Savage Orruk Boys. That's great. The Boys are the berserker, harder hitting ones with extra attacks. Sure. Is the ability good? No. But it's easy to build. And that's the case with a lot of these. They're fairly easy to build. And that's really just it. Now, you do have allies in the form of Gloopsite Gits, but I'm not going to cover that there, or here. And that is what you need to know about getting started with the Orruk Warclans. They're a high aggression army that appear one thing or the other. So such in the case of Ironjawz, they appear slow but are actually not, and are very efficient at what they do. Or you have the Bonesplitterz, which they appear squishy with low saves, but actually are not. And then they're focused on quantity over quality, and just throwing attacks all over the place and just drowning people in saves and doing that. So, as opposed to hitting well with high damage, they just hit a lot. And that is the thing. Both armies are fairly good at different things. They can both stand on their own. Most people will argue that competitively, Bonesplitterz are the better choice, and this just comes from their magic lore and their sheer number of attacks. I can say that's pretty good, having seen some competitive Bonesplitterz go at it. Ironjawz, at the same time, they're very fun. They're slightly less competitive, but don't let that competitive term fool you off. They kill things just as well as anything else, and they're pretty good as well. Both, again, because they're high aggression, the objective game is probably going to be secondary to you unless you're really going to build with that in mind. Now, you can do that, but that's more points you're investing away, and not using it. As the Orcs, you want to be using everything you've got to be hitting, particularly because just about all of it is close combat. The best things you have for capping objectives are characters, that particularly the wizard ones that you want to have staying behind a unit of boys or brutes or whatever unit you have, and using that to cap the objective while buffing them and keeping the enemy at bay and smashing things to pieces over there, away from the objective, which hopefully you control. Or, in the case of Bonesplitterz, you have arrow boys, which can actually deliver stuff from a range, and now they become good objective cappers. Now, again, you have that deceptive amount of mobility that you can use to also move around and cap objectives if you need to. So there is that. Now, the Bonesplitterz are probably the better choice if you want to play to that. They can double their move with the magic spells. They get to move up, and they can go and take objectives and play the maneuver in game, and they can use the boars really well. Whereas the Ironjawz are get on the objective, sit on the objective, make them get you off of it. So one is better at taking, one is better at holding, but even then, that's just really generalizing because they're both really good. They are armies that stand on their own that you can go with. And then the Great Waaagh is a lovely little soup that you can mix it all together and just kind of do what you want. And on top of that, both armies are easy to put together. The Get Started boxes gets you a solid foundation of shit you want for the Ironjawz, and then you only have to pick up a Mega Boss, a Weird Knob, and some Brutes, and then, you know, maybe a Maw Crusher or 2, 3, and the Bonesplitterz. They're nice and easy to build once you figure out the build ratios of what you want to be building. 20 standard boys to 10 more boys is about the best to try and maximize attacks. You can go 30 to 20 as well. And just figuring out and very carefully planning, okay, what's this box? Okay, I'm going to be building from this box X unit. And now part of the reason I bring that up is because the unit sizes for more boys and regular boys is different. So just bear that in mind. But the minimum sizes. And there's a little bit of planning in there that you can do to maximize it. And maximizing your Bonesplitterz purchases, you can build an entire 2,000 point army by getting about 6 to 7 boxes of the Orruk boys. And that's where you can really cap it there. And you can build those as nice big blobs of regular boys, and the rest of them can be more boys. And then if you buy 7, you've even got enough to build yourself a huge squad of big stabbers. And really maximize all those bits you're getting across all those boxes. And that's that as a result. But once you buy those lots of boxes, and you buy the boxes of the boar boys, and you know, you buy however many you want of them, again, similar ratios. You always want, well, actually in this case, because of their cavalry bases, you kind of want small squads of both. And really, it will just depend on whether you want them to be slightly more defensive or just to hit very, very hard. In which case, the Berserker Boar Boys, Maniac Boar Boys, are the better option just about every day of the week, unless you really want that defense. And they're better in the 5-man squads. But the Maniacs are better, but the Savage Boar Boys, they can do work, and you give them spears, and they got reach. So, and then once you have those 7 boxes or so, and you build them up, you can just throw in your characters, and you don't need too many of them, but you do need them. And once you've got them, that's it. That's your army all together. Nice and easy to collect, nice and easy to play, but enough tactical nuance when you get in and read the rules to realize that you can do some cheeky things, and clever use of your units, particularly in both sides, is always going to reward you. Again, but that's general advice for Age of Sigmar. So, I have been Jay from Jade Productions, and thank you for watching. If you have any questions or would like to discuss Warclans in any sort of detail, do so in the comments. If you have questions, particularly about certain aspects of the book and things that you really want to know that I didn't cover, or you want me to go into more detail on, again, leave them in the comments. If you have requests for lists, I will be posting a sample list in new videos coming out. Where I look at lists and break them down. And if you want to request that I build a list a certain way so that you can see it, make sure to leave it down in the comments below. For example, if you want to all see an example of a good all boar list for Bonesplitterz, or an all great waaagh Bonesplitterz boar list, you know, things like that. Leave them down below, and I'll see you next time. Till then, I've been Jay. Happy wargaming. Stay safe.